So, hello everyone. I'm Trevor Hassel, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar and make a few remarks on behalf of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and its youth arm, the organizers and hosts of the webinar. And let me begin by saying how pleased I am to see the many persons registered, both from within and outside the region, for this webinar. Over the past several years, the large numbers of obese adults and children in the Caribbean has been an increasing public health concern, with childhood obesity in the Caribbean projected to be in the top 10 in 2030 of child obesity rates. This situation has led to a focus on childhood obesity prevention, resulting in several positive outcomes in the Caribbean. For example, a tax on sugary sweetened beverages has been imposed in some countries. Policies and legislation aimed at healthier school environments have been enacted, and there are encouraging indications that a standard of front of package labeling of food products, which allows consumers to quickly and easily identify when a product is high in critical nutrients, will be agreed on shortly. Much of this progress has been made as a result of the significant efforts of the youth who have come together across the region and established broad coalitions and set up networks to demand a better world, a healthier world, and I dare say, a less obese world. These developments and outcomes reflect calls for greater awareness of the need for food policies and enabling environments to control childhood obesity and overweight in the Caribbean. And they have been detailed, for example, in the HCC's Childhood Obesity Prevention Plan, and also the HCC's new Transformative NCD agenda for building back better. And in addition, in a discussion paper recently produced by SIDS Civil Society, I encourage everyone to have a look at these reports, as well as the World Obesity Plan to stop obesity. What is now needed is a tax on sugary sweetened beverages of at least 20% by an increased number of Caribbean countries, with the aim of widespread reduction of intake of these beverages. A greater number of Caribbean countries also now need to pass healthy school policies so that neither sugary sweetened beverages nor deemed unhealthy fast foods are available and sold in and around schools. And those countries that have enacted healthy school policies need to ensure that they are monitored to ensure policy coherence. Lastly, I now call on the region to continue to show highest level of political leadership in the response to NCDs by approving food labeling standards using black octagonal front of package nutritional warning labels and applying PAHO nutrient profile to indicate high in critical nutrients. Today's webinar, held in recognition and celebration of World Obesity Day 2023, is but part of the ongoing efforts of the youth of the region to continue to lead on childhood obesity prevention. During the webinar, the several aspects of the continuum of care of childhood obesity will be considered, and the changing perspectives of childhood obesity addressed. These will be undertaken by a wide cross-section of players and stakeholders in the obesity arena, and they will discuss current and future management strategies, reflect on new guidelines for treating obesity in children and the implications of these guidelines for the Caribbean, and they'll highlight opportunities to improve obesity management in the region and explore the patient's experience in managing obesity. And so the next hour and a half looks very exciting. So please, everyone, stay engaged and actively participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Trevor, for those opening remarks and really setting the stage. Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Walwyn, and I am the Advocacy Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, as well as Coordinator of Healthy Caribbean Youth, which is the Healthy Caribbean Coalition's youth arm. Are there any issues with my camera? Can everyone see me clearly? Okay, great. Okay, great. Thanks for that confirmation. Okay, so Sir Trevor really provided a good overview of what we hope to cover today. But to get the conversation started, we're really looking forward to having some audience engagement at the start of this conversation and throughout the webinar. So I'm going to invite everyone to complete this question by clicking the link in the chat. We really want to get a sense of what is happening in the region with regards to prevention and management. So you can click on the link in the chat and you'll be able to anonymously share what's happening. And I think from this little exercise, we'll be able to see what our strengths are in terms of prevention and management, as well as perhaps some of the gaps. So let us see the responses coming in. Feel free to also include the country that you are responding from. So we have school nutrition policy being implemented. Excellent. Any other thoughts, ideas, strategies? And feel free to also, if you're having some trouble with the link, to post them in the chat as well. Prevention, school meals, PE programs, great. Jamaica's limiting on sugars and drinks that can be sold in schools, increased PSAs in Barbados. So a lot about health promotion. As you can see, an emphasis has been on prevention so far. Yes, in Barbados, we had the launch of the school nutrition policy, investments in civil society organizations to build public support for policies and to support government responses. Excellent. So we're hearing about the different stakeholders that have been involved in these efforts. Move to ban the sugar-laden drinks in schools, Barbados ban of soft drinks in school premises. Excellent. Thank you so much for the engagement so far. And again, I think we're seeing, because the intention of this exercise was really to see where we are in terms of our strengths, which you can see there are efforts being executed across the Caribbean. But as you can see from this, we're not seeing a lot on management of childhood obesity. So I'm hoping that this is really what we can delve into today. Thank you so much, everyone, for your responses. Great. And feel free, I'm going to close this now, but feel free to continue to respond in the chat as well. So just a quick housekeeping matter. Please feel free, as I said, we're hoping that this is a really engaging webinar from both our panelist moderators as well as our audience members. So feel free to share any comments that you have in the chat and any specific questions that you have for panelists. Please feel free to use the Q&A box. Just a quick note that this webinar will be recorded. Okay. So to begin the conversation, we're going to be centering on the lived experiences. And I'm hopeful that throughout the webinar, we continue to keep those children living with obesity at the forefront of our discussions, especially given the fact that they have a right to health. They have a right to live, learn, and play in environments that prioritize their health. And it is important for us to remember that that right to health also extends to health care. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first two panelists, Mr. Kareem Smith, who is a journalist and wears many, 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 many hats. But today he's going to be talking about his lived experience with obesity as a child and young person. And then we also have Mr. Jomo Phillips. He's a parent of a child who has lived with obesity. Unfortunately, Mr. Phillips can't join us in person, but he has sent some pre-recorded responses. And personally, so I'm going to invite Mr. Smith to join me on screen. And just as I share personally, I was a child who was overweight. And I had weight fluctuations throughout my adolescent years. I was called big boned. I had a number of people who would be questioning and commenting on my weight gain if they hadn't seen me between a certain amount of time. Like if 6 months had passed, they would pass open comments on my weight. And to be honest with you, that has affected me 20 plus years later. And I know that our perspective around obesity and weight is different in the Caribbean. And this became very clear when I had the opportunity to join a weight stigma and bias group facilitated by the World Obesity Federation. And again, it became evident to me how different the Caribbean perceives obesity. And so that is my first question that I would like to pose to our panelists, starting with Mr. Phillips. How is obesity viewed in the Caribbean? Janae or Carrie rather, can we play the video from Mr. Phillips?
Thanks for allowing me to add my voice to this particular conversation. I certainly think that we have a complicated history in terms of obesity here in the Caribbean, for sure. A lot of ambivalence in terms of just sort of what particular types of bodies look good. And we sort of have a love affair with big women in particular in the region. I think sometimes to the peril of young ladies with regards to being able to manage their weight. And I am the father of a young lady who is now 11 and has been working on managing her weight over the last few years.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for that. And I feel like some of those comments, you can let me know, audience, if that resonates or anything that Mr. Phillips said resonated with you. And so, Kareem, bringing you in here, any thoughts on what Mr. Phillips shared, and does that resonate with you? And what is your experience or opinion on how obesity is viewed in the Caribbean?
Thank you so much, Danielle, for including me on in this conversation. I just want to say from the outset that everything that I say is just based on a lived experience. It's not based on, medical research or any kind of experience as a medical professional or anything like that, but just from the experience of some person who throughout the majority of my childhood would have been overweight and from time to time obese, and just from the lived perspective and my interactions with persons from a very young age. So I think all of what he said was correct. And I think that I would agree that our relationship with health in general is quite complicated, going all the way back to our colonial history. How is obesity viewed in the Caribbean? I think the simple answer is not very good. And from my perspective, from a young age, that's because there are a multiplicity of very politically incorrect, sometimes insulting words and ways that are used to describe children who are overweight, and in circumstances where there are very few real pathways for parents and for children to actually address that problem. So from a social perspective, I think children are often exposed to a tremendous amount of dialogue about their weight, their appearance, and their health in situations that aren't really ideal and aren't really constructive or helpful. And I think one of the main issues for that is a lack of education and a bit of ignorance about what causes children to be overweight and obese. And I think sometimes a lot of the blame can inadvertently be even placed on very young children. So I personally can recall quite a few very heated arguments, not involving me as a child, but involving relatives, family, friends, and even strangers about whether I am overweight or obese, or whether I'm just big boned, whether I'm licorice, which in the Barbadian context means that you are greedy, or whether, the weight will just magically disappear when I get a bit older and a bit taller. And in the meantime, I think it becomes very clear to children that they're very different from their peers when they start to attract, names of endearment that are all centered on their weight. Fat boy, fat man, things like that. And it also becomes an area of weakness. And I think in our societies, we've become, children especially, very skillful at insulting children using adjectives that again center on their weight, their obesity. And from a familial perspective, I believe obesity is met with quite a bit of concern from a health perspective. But I think, again, with a tinge of ignorance and not exactly knowing how to address it and what to do. And not only because of the health implication, but also because of the societal implications as well. And the feeling that perhaps as a parent, you may not be doing what you should be to kind of manage your child's weight. And I think from a broader perspective, in terms of policymakers and government, I think at least when I was growing up, and again, I was pretty young, but when I was growing up, I didn't feel as though it was viewed as a real priority area from our policymakers and the wider society, our institutions, etc. So I think we're heading in the right direction with some of the policies, but I do believe that there needs to be a bit more monitoring, a bit more enforcement of some of the policies, and some of the general public awareness campaigns and information that can help us as a society kind of tackle childhood obesity a bit more effectively.
Thank you, Kareem, for sharing that and your insight. And again, you're hearing this demand for urgent action coming from someone, again, who has been through those experiences. You heard directly from Kareem what his experiences were like as a child. And Kareem, what I'm also hearing from you is that when we're dealing with obesity and weight in general, it's a sensitive issue that's not given enough or not treated with enough sensitivity. So I heard that from you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your experience? You did allude to some things, but anything further about your experience as a child living with obesity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously mindful of time because there's a lot that I can say about my childhood experience with obesity and overweight. Because to be honest with you, I don't think that I was obese for a very long time, but I was overweight for the majority of my childhood. And well, for as long as I can remember, I have had a very hearty appetite, and from a very young age, a very mature palate. And I know generally persons who deal in early childhood usually say that, the early age, the early period 0 to 8 is an area where you're likely to pick up on habits that you may take through life or that may have a lifelong impact on you and on your development. And I remember hearing stories from my parents, especially when I was very young, 2, maybe 3 years old, at Sabbath school, where we would go to church, and when Sabbath school was over, there would be a break period where all the children would have their snacks, and generally you would see sweet biscuits. I don't want to call names of manufacturers, but sweet biscuits, salty chips and snacks. And my mother would have a flask for me that would have anything from, sweet potato, cuckoo and flying fish, which we eat here in Barbados a lot, or used to at least, ground provisions, vegetables, etc. And because of that, I got the nickname Mr. Food, because many children, there are not many children that you would come across who are into eating things like that. And I would eat a very large meal at, that mid-morning period. And my mother would always say, I would look up after the flask was empty, I would look up at her longingly as if to ask, where's the rest of it? So I had a big appetite from a very young age. And at that stage, I think that I was just considered, healthy, growing, a hearty appetite, all good things in a very young child. But I think as I got a bit older, in terms of going into primary school, and as my parents, I guess, started to get a little bit busier with work and life, the responsibility for choosing what I eat, at least at lunchtime at school, would fall on me. And the options on the menu were, on Monday, I remember I would have a nice big portion of fries. On Tuesday, a nice big macaroni pie. Probably I think Wednesday and Friday I would eat fries again. And to this day, I have a very tough relationship with fries. I really love fries and I struggle with it. And then on Thursday, I would have pizza and a donut for lunch. And around that, there would be soft drinks, sweet drinks, snacks in between. And because I think of the appetite that I would have developed from a very young age, I think it translated into, 7, 8, 9 years old. I had the same appetite, but I wasn't eating sweet potato anymore. I was eating fries. And my weight, I started to gain a tremendous amount of weight in a very short space of time. I was active, I was exercising and playing with my friends, but I was gaining a lot of weight. And I think around that same time, I would have been introduced to fast food as well. And I mean, as time went along, I think around the time that I was sitting in the common entrance exam is when I became obese. And I think that's the time when my family started to get very concerned. And I also started to get a bit concerned because I'd realized that my weight gain had become the center of attention in many respects, So I remember one time in my early teenage life, I had my best friend to this day. We went to a particular park and we were playing in the park, and one of the guards came up to us and said, well, you guys are too big to be playing in here. And then another guard walks up and he says, no, one is too big. And those are some of the experiences that I think would have really had a very lasting impact on me, on how I viewed my body and how I viewed health and whatnot. And I think I also had an experience with the doctor where the doctor at one point said, you are too fat. It was a bit politically incorrect, but it was concerning to my parents. And I think one of the challenges that they had is that they did not quite know what to do. And in speaking with them now as an adult, they were very concerned. They just didn't know what to do. And I think that's one of the challenges that we parents especially face as a society, especially when you go to school and the environment isn't really there for like a healthy lifestyle.
You gave us so much to think about. Just on that note, there are a couple of things, and audience members, feel free to share things that resonated with you. Words matter, because I'm sure that incident that you mentioned just now was 20 plus years ago. And again, here we are, recognizing that words matter. The environment, which we're going to continue to speak about throughout the webinar, and the importance of different stakeholders recognizing their responsibility to shape the environment, to go to what your point was saying, and removing that ownership and blame on the individual, and recognizing that the individual is part of so many other different layers of environment. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing again your lived experience. I'm hoping that this really will resonate with the audience members. And you started to transition into the importance of family, and which brings us into Mr. Phillips' question. So at the World Health Assembly last year, I'm not sure if persons recognize this, but obesity was one of the highest items on the agenda, and the WHO actually renewed some recommendations with regards to childhood obesity prevention and management. And some of these recommendations are very similar to what is in the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines that Professor St. John is going to speak about shortly. But one of the things that was aligned in both of those recommendations and guidelines was the need for family-centered support for a child who's living with overweight and obesity. And Kareem, you started to allude to this. So I'm going to turn my final question for this segment over to Mr. Phillips and ask him what his experience has been like having and living and supporting a child who has overweight or obesity.
Living with a child who has been obese. Yeah, she's now within the normal BMI. She actually went and got her annual physical today with her pediatrician. So I'm thankful for that, but it has been a challenging situation. I think one of the reasons that both of us, or both parents that just got her enrolled in the Heart and Stroke Foundation's gym was because of a recommendation by her pediatrician, who was concerned about her weight and just sort of the health implications in terms of that. That has also worried us as parents. And that's one of the reasons that we got her enrolled in the Heart and Stroke Foundation's youth gym. And just in terms of just sort of helping her to be able to, because the Heart and Stroke Foundation Youth Gym has a variety of different activities, which are all very valuable. So there's the exercise component, but there's also a variety of things in terms of engaging parents with regards to healthy diets and helping children to manage their weight. There's also the education for our daughter, who's been learning about things like eating and preparing healthy meals. And I think one of the things that's really important for her as well too is being able to bond and to engage with other young people. I think that's certainly what has sort of kept her going in terms of attending the program, has been that there have been other young people who look like her and who have similar struggles, but who also have fun and enjoy the program as well.
Great, thank you, Mr. Phillips. So you're hearing from Mr. Phillips about the challenge that is being a parent of a child who lives with overweight and obesity, but how important it is to have those support mechanisms and programs to support them, not only the child, but the family members as well. So shout out to the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados and their youth gym and Professor St. John, who you'll hear from shortly, in terms of creating that space for not only the parents to thrive and support, but also for the child as well. So thank you to Mr. Phillips, and thank you to Kareem for setting the stage and again, centering on this lived experience that we need to think through as we navigate through the rest of the webinar and beyond. And so it is my pleasure to invite our audience members to engage once more in our Mentimeter question. So we've heard, again, the lived experience. We've heard about what it's like for a child's, or rather Kareem's experience of living as a child with overweight and obesity. And so we're now shifting into the management aspect. And so what do you think? So all of you, I know you're coming from various backgrounds, but what do you think are important aspects to caring for a child living with overweight and obesity? So feel free to click on that link, and just like last time, input your thoughts. And I think your thoughts will guide us into our next segment. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Understanding the rights of a child, very powerful. So we spoke about this earlier in terms of their right to health, but their right to, by extension, health care, and their right to be treated with dignity when they're in not only a physician's office, but even outside. And if we were thinking about those rights, comments like what Kareem has experienced wouldn't really happen, right? So having a strong network and support system, parents need to be educated about childhood obesity. Don't single them out, get the whole family involved. Supporting mental health, Yes, including self-esteem issues and bullying. Excellent. Any other thoughts? Focusing on the vulnerable for a rights-based approach, right to accurate and scientific information, allowing them to not feel cheated of their childhood while addressing their condition. Excellent, excellent responses. Clients and healthcare providers being honest and getting realistic goals while also being sensitive, as Kareem mentioned, how important that is, that sensitive approach. Excellent. Okay, so thank you all so much for your contributions. Feel free to continue to contribute and share in the chat. I'm going to close this down now, involving the whole family. Excellent. Okay, and you're seeing some themes: multiple stakeholders, family support, using a rights-based approach, a mental health focus. We're also looking at the food options that they have and thinking about the child as a person with feelings and the support that they need. Okay, excellent. Thank you all so much for continuing to be a great audience and super engaged. And so it is my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Pierre Cook Jr. He is HCC's Youth Technical Advisor, and I'm going to let him do the honor of introducing our next segment and our presenter. Pierre, over to you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. And also thank you to all of you who have joined us today for this discussion. And it really makes us happy here at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition to see so many persons engage in a conversation about childhood obesity and childhood obesity prevention. And I think for us in Barbados, when we think of children and their healthcare and pediatricians, there's certainly one name that most often comes to mind, and that is the one of our next expert, Professor Anne St. John. I'd like to introduce Professor Anne St. John to our audience. And Professor St. John has been a champion of children's health and their rights, and necessarily, advocating for what's best for them. She's the co-founding member of the Youth Gym at the Heart and Stroke Foundation. And you just heard Jomo speak about the benefits that the gym had provided for his daughter. And she remains a champion for the improving of the quality of health and life for the children in Barbados. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. St. John. See if we...
Good morning, Pierre. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you for that kind introduction.
Can everyone see and hear Dr. St. John? I can see you.
It should be up there.
Perfect. And now I can hear you. Brilliant. So we're just going to jump straight into our first question. And again, this is a conversation with who we consider to be an expert in this area. So Dr. St. John, if you could tell us what is currently being done in the Caribbean, if you know, to manage overweight and obesity of children, just across the region or even specifically in Barbados?
This is a very challenging topic to give all the answers in the time allocated. However, I'll try to cover it as best I can. And historically, the effort started in 2007 when the CARICOM heads of government met in Port of Spain, and there was a Port of Spain declaration to look at combating NCDs, and various things were considered, such as taxes and other interventions to reduce the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, and looking at approaches from schools and healthy nutrition and labeling of food. So it started way back in 2007 with this commitment by the governments. However, time passed, a decade went by, and 2016 they met again and reviewed the highlights of the commitments, with not much having been done after that Port of Spain declaration. So they added to that some regard for banning smoking in public places and some trade-related measures. Now, looking back to your question, what has been the Caribbean response, broadly and then more specifically according to territories? In the Caribbean, presently, to date, certain territories have imposed taxes. Barbados and Dominica have imposed taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages, and Bermuda, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines have a sugar tax. Looking at Trinidad and Tobago, there's been a ban on the sale of sugar-sweetened beverages in all government schools. And looking at Jamaica, there has been a widespread campaign through ads, nutrition guidelines imposed, and restrictions on sugar-sweetened beverages. How effective have these measures been? In Bermuda, they imposed a tax on sugar by 75%. And they found consumption of one or more sugary drinks a day amongst adults declined from 50% in 2014 to 42% in 2019, more amongst the men than the women. Of course, this would mean more sugar-free options had to come onto the market. There's been a lot of public discussion and rhetoric about the value and the effects of raising taxes. But we must remember that in the tobacco era, where people were consuming a lot of tobacco, there has been great results reported and a significant decline in tobacco consumption when the taxes are raised. Looking at our own market here, Barbados, we imposed a 10% tax on sweetened beverages in 2015, and there was a hue and cry that it might not work. However, it did result in some decrease and an increase in the sales of water, 8%, and a 4% decrease in the sale of sugar-sweetened beverages, as estimated by interaction with the wholesalers who sell these drinks. In 2022, the administration raised the sugar-sweetened beverage tax to 20%, and it remains for us to see with scientific research what effect that has had. Looking at Mexico, where there's been a longer experience, a 10% sugar-sweetened beverage tax was passed, and they observed a 6% decrease in the sales of sugar-sweetened beverages. So there's no question that Caribbean governments need to pursue and continue with increasing their taxes on sugar-sweetened beverage to have the desired effect.
Yes.
Looking then what our government's doing with regard to schools. There are childhood initiatives in schools, looking at school nutrition policy as mentioned by Sir Trevor, and joint ventures between the Ministries of Health and Education and Wellness to try to make this measure effective in schools. And in Barbados, between last year when it was passed by Cabinet and this year when it was launched officially last month, there has been a schools nutrition policy, because policy works to a lot more than just gentle persuasion. Looking at what governments can do and have been trying to do in schools, increasing the demand for healthy foods amongst children, and looking at curriculums in primary and secondary schools. Many of the islands and countries provide meals for their primary school level age children. And so this is an area where you can have impact because the diet is being regulated between the time of 8 in the morning until they leave school in the afternoon. And that's when they do most of their eating. So looking at education within the schools, enhancing the knowledge and skills, NCDs, the risks and the drivers, and looking at secondary schools where we introduce in the curriculum across CARICOM, looking at the health and family life curriculum, measures to try to improve nutrition. So this was adopted by the CARICOM ministers of education in 2019, and it is certainly a plus. And they're now working with partners to develop digital content for teachers and families. Then there are other measures being developed in the region, facilitating children, teaching children through videos and television programs, looking at edutainment, digital content resources, and particular scripts and audios, short audios gearing between the ages of 6 to 9 and 10 to 12, and teachers' manuals to try to educate the students from a young age about that. So looking at CARICOM regional policies on trans fatty acid consumption, again, the Ministers of Health and Trade met in as recently as April 2022, agreeing to work towards prohibition of production, importation, distribution, sale, and use of content of the oils, fats, and foods for human consumption in the CARICOM member states. So they're committed to developing a policy position to work towards regulations and legislation. Legislation being extremely important to be in place by December 2022.
Yes.
There are other efforts at the CARICOM level. Policies. In 2018, the Scientific Research Council and Bureau of Standards in Jamaica, and along with Canada partnering, funded a project in the University of the West Indies to try to make some progress on this. And also in Jamaica, there has been upgrading of the laboratories to analyze the content of salt, sugar, fat in food products. So national standards are very important. Then there is also the front of page package labeling initiative, which has been quite successful, and community interventions. So these are the things which the CARICOM governments and regional islands have tried to put in place so far.
Thank you, Dr. St. John. And I think you really gave us a comprehensive picture and idea of what's happening in the region through the taxes, the nutrition policies, etc. So I think we're going to coalesce the next question just to get that last bit of expert information from you, and that is, there is the new guidelines that were released by the American Pediatric Association. What I would like to know from you are, very quickly, what are the implications of that guideline for the management of obesity in the Caribbean?
Those guidelines are not too soon in coming. In fact, over the years in pediatrics, we have really struggled with trying to make parents sensitized, as Karim mentioned in his expression, his experience. We find that doctors, healthcare providers are not sensitized that obesity and overweight is an issue health-wise. A child will come with a cold and cough and the child is overweight. The overweight isn't mentioned often, just the acute illness. And therefore, if you don't identify something as an issue, you don't try to manage it. So the American Academy's guidelines of about 90 pages, quite comprehensive. And in essence, there's not a lot new there. It says you need to examine the child, you need to identify issues, risk factors, genetic, all sorts of factors which play a role in the obesity and overweight. And then you need to treat the obesity as soon as the diagnosis is made, not to wait until the child's a teenager. From the time the child starts coming for well baby care, a lot of bullet points are highlighted, and these are certainly things which are quite clear, but the healthcare providers need to follow these guidelines to the letter if we are going to make some progress in combating our 1 in 3 epidemic of obesity in children.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. John. And necessarily, we will be imploring and be asking those members on the call, and even those doctors on the call to try their best to follow these measures and implement these measures. We are going to have an opportunity for the audience to interact with our panelists as well, but for now we want to thank you for the expert information you provided so far on the management of obesity in the region and just how we could use these guidelines to improve the quality of healthcare for children in the region. Thank you very much, Dr. St. John.
We do have a ways to go. We need the structured programs to be rolled out and a concerted local and regional effect, cooperation, cohesiveness to implement policies, consistent monitoring and evaluation at local and national levels, because it is a work in progress. And we need additional, as many as possible, ancillary health resources like more nutrition inputs, surgical specialists to be able to do bariatric surgery where it is indicated, because one thing new in the AAP's guidelines, they have recommendations for bariatric surgery, certain age groups and certain BMIs. So we do have a ways to go, but we need to have a concerted, united effort in this epidemic.
Okay, very quickly, could you explain for our panelists what, or just tell us in a few words what bariatric surgery is? Bariatric
surgery is the last resort after you have tried the medical interventions like looking at your nutrition, physical activity, but in essence, it is laparoscopic or keyhole surgery where you bypass an area of the intestine from the stomach to another part of the intestine to be able to reduce the absorption of a lot of the content which is taken in.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. St. John. You've provided us with a wealth of information. Danielle, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Pierre, and to Prof. St. John, again, really speaking on that management piece, what's been done in the Caribbean already. And if you haven't noticed, a lot of the prevention tactics that we use in terms of creating healthy food environments are also part of the management piece as well. So thank you both so much. And we're going to move on to talk a bit more about the perspectives on the future of childhood obesity management. But I just wanted to highlight a piece of news that came out today. So the World Obesity Federation released a new World Obesity Atlas today, indicating that majority of the global population will be living with overweight or obesity if current trends prevail. So in summary, it's really important for us to get this thing right. It's important for us to really think through strategies that work well in our Caribbean context, in our resource limited context, and also really think through and get more resources towards, or put more resources towards that management piece. And one thing that has been highlighted throughout the conversation so far in our comments, and when I asked you about audience members about what's needed to care for a child living with overweight and obesity, you mentioned mental health, you mentioned nutrition and healthy environments. And so the guidelines that Dr. St. John just mentioned also emphasize the importance of mental health in caring for that child. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the next segment, focused on the future of obesity management, Ms. Elena Gomes. She is a counseling psychologist from Antigua and a member of Healthy Caribbean Youth. Elena, turning it over to you to introduce the segment and our panelists.
All right, thank you so much, Danielle. All right, so this segment of the discussion will be focused on perspectives on the future of childhood obesity management, as well as policies that can be implemented to hopefully modify environments and prevent and manage weight gain. In this segment, we're going to be having 4 different panelists. 2 we would have seen before, which would have been Jomo Phillips, the parent of a child living with obesity, as well as Kareem Smith, person with lived experience of having obesity. And the new panelists that we'll be introducing today are Professor Alafia Samuels, who's the chair of NCD Child and member of the Board of Trustees of the World Obesity Federation, and Miss Michelle Sutton, Health and Wellness Coordinator at the Curriculum Development Unit at the Ministry of Education in beautiful St. Kitts and Nevis. I did see that there's some representation there. So Ms. Sutton, you do have some people supporting you from your island today. Now, just to briefly touch on what Prof. St. John was mentioning, she did a great job of explaining what policies, projects, and other efforts have been already implemented in some Caribbean countries, and kind of what, you know, the framework is going to be coming out with soon. But I think what we really need to focus on, as Danielle said, yes, mental health, but a very strong theme coming out here today is that we really need to have a holistic support system and a multi-sectoral support system for our children, for the parents, for the educational system, and just for society in general, because it's so important, right? The more people who are found to be living with obesity or considered to be overweight, the more people, quite frankly, we can find to also maybe have mental health problems. So I don't know if anybody's aware, but there are studies that have been done that show about 1 in 10 children who are considered to be obese are found to have, for example, depression. Okay, and depression is not the only thing that they can have. There's also anxiety, low self-esteem, and a whole host of other mental health concerns that could arise from people who are living with obesity or are considered to be overweight. Now, with that, Professor Alafia Samuels, I would love to introduce you and bring you on at this point to kind of share what your perspective is on the guidelines that were presented by Prof. St. John from the American Pediatric Association on managing and treating obesity in children.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to give some comments. Of course, I should preface my comments by saying that I am not in clinical practice. I am a physician, but I have been working in public health for the last 20 years or so. So that's the disclaimer going forward. So yes, I looked at the guidelines. I was happy to see them. They are evidence-informed guidelines. They were long due for updating. They focus primarily on intervention, and it says prevention guidelines are forthcoming. So my first complaint is that I think the prevention guidelines should have come first. I think by putting treatment first, it puts the treatment as sort of the priority or the most important, because what comes first is number one, and what comes second is number two. So I think that it was an error to put out the treatment guidelines before they put out the prevention guidelines, because I think prevention is important not only to prevent, but it is also the same things that you will need to maintain the patient after they have had the treatment. So I think it's a little unbalanced. I think at a minimum, they should have put out the two guidelines together. So the second problem I have is that I think that, well, quoting from some comments that I found, medication and surgery are just band-aids in a society that can't figure out what to really do to protect the interest of children. And we recognize that children are more sedentary and eating less healthful foods than in the past. So the treatment guidelines to me are like, you know, you have a leak in something and you are trying to pour water to make it better instead of trying to actually prevent the thing from getting worse. So I also think that putting out these guidelines first gives comfort to Big Food and Big Soda, because they can now say it's okay to cause obesity in these children because we have treatment. So, you know, go ahead and eat the McDonald's and the KFC. When you get too fat, you go and get your surgery, no problem. I think that's the wrong message. I think the approach reminds me of when we were looking back in the day of managing diarrhea in children. We developed oral rehydration salts, which was great and good. But we treated the children and then we sent them back into the same environment and then they got diarrhea again. So in a kind of a way, it's not the best way to go about doing things. How we finally got on top of diarrhea is by clean water and rotavirus vaccination. Both things were preventive interventions, not curative. And as I said before, I'm a public health person, so this is, you know, I say what I know and what I believe in. The other issue, of course, is the cost and feasibility in small island developing states. We already have a limited budget where there are, in some places, you know, challenges. It is not unlimited resources. The feasibility in SIDS also needs to be considered. When you have a procedure, like with everything else in life, the more of them that you do, the more skilled you become at doing them. And in small island states with small numbers and small numbers of children who are going to be needing bariatric surgery, I have concerns about the development of the skill level that takes, you know, doing many cases to develop that. My final concern has to do with, and this is probably not with the guidelines itself, but in children, of course, you know, there's a whole concept of a growth curve, you know, from they are young, you track them over time and so on. So what we have now is a definition of obesity and overweight, which is based on the 75th percentile of the weight of children. Now, as the weight of children increase, the average rate is going to increase, and therefore the 95th percentile is going to increase. So are we saying that, you know, if 10 years from now, when we have 2 out of 3 children obese, the 95th percentile is going to shift? So it seems to me, and maybe Dr. St. John or someone else with more technical knowledge in this area can clarify for me, this 95th percentile, is it the 95th percentile of existing children? Because as those existing children get fatter and fatter, the 95th percentile is going to go higher and higher. And so the cutoff for obesity is going to go up and up as we continue to accept that the obesity is the norm. So that's my question as to how that 95th percentile is going to influence how we define obesity in children. Thank you.
Well, Prof. Samuels, that was excellent. And I think you raised an important point there that the guidelines seemingly focus more on the treatment aspect, which, as you said, makes it seem like, well, you can take as many sweetened drinks as you like and, you know, the processed foods because, you know what, it's fine, we have treatment, as opposed to focusing more on, well, you know what, we need to prevent this from happening, as opposed to focusing on the fact that there is available treatment for persons who, you know, are living with obesity or considered overweight. The cost feasibility, I thought, was also quite interesting that you would have mentioned, as well as the fact that as the average weight increases, because, you know, the general population's weight would increase, and, you know, how does that affect the 95th percentile? I think, as you said, probably Prof. St. John would be the best person to address that probably later down when we have the question and answer segment, but that was excellent. Thank you. Kareem, if you could come on now, that would be great to kind of share your comments on some of the information that Prof. St. John would have mentioned in her presentation about the guidelines and some of your shared personal obesity management experience with us, and maybe even some tips and tricks that you might have.
Yes, well, as I said earlier on, I'm not quite in a position to critique from a technical perspective. I am happy, though, that our public health officials are taking these steps. And I have to agree as well with Professor Samuels, and especially when I reflect on my own experience, that prevention is definitely better than cure. And I believe that the more we have the resources to prevent obesity, especially and to instill good habits from that early childhood area of children's lives, then we're in a better position to maintain it as they go into adolescence and even into adulthood. What I can do is to kind of just share the aspects of my journey where I would have been able to get to a place where I could manage my overweight, my obesity a bit better. And I think even within that experience, I think it becomes very clear that without technical expertise, without our public health officials, being actively involved in this process, then people do kind of what I would have done to kind of lose weight. And so around the age of 16, 17, later stage adolescence, I would have moved away from primary from secondary into the Barbados Community College. And it was at that point that not much from a health perspective, but from more so from a social perspective, I felt a burning need to lose the weight. And I mean, in the simplest sense, you consume based on how much you consume versus how much you burn. Once your body is functioning normally, you should be able to lose weight. And I began counting, being very aware of doing personal research and trying to become as aware as possible of the average amount of calories, for instance, saturated fat, trans fat, protein, carbohydrate content. I became more or less an expert at label reading, and in circumstances where there weren't labels, I would have done as much research as I could have into how much I was putting into my body and how I would be able to lose it. I think that without the guidance, I may have gone a bit overboard in terms of calorie counting, and to the point where I went on the other end of the spectrum and may have been consuming a bit too few calories, and I lost a lot of weight. But again, I was able to speak with some nutritionists as I got a bit older, and today I believe that I have been able to achieve a greater deal of balance. I eat at regular intervals. I try to eat as much as possible whole foods as opposed to processed foods, which tend to contain a lot more sodium, a lot more fat, and perhaps in certain instances, things that may not necessarily even show up on the label, or unless we read the labels very, 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 very carefully. So I try to eat whole foods, as I said, vegetables. In circumstances where I eat meat, I try not to eat red meat. I eat more white meat, chicken, fish, and I tend not to eat, again, processed meat. So a chicken hot dog, I can't quite get a handle of, the nutritional content of that versus a piece of chicken breast. And I think simple skills, simple, not skills, but more guidance and guidelines, again, from an earlier age, can ensure that we are in a better position to help our children to avoid, becoming overweight, having to deal with the social stigma, and then also having to deal with many of the health problems that we know will present themselves if we're not able to manage those situations properly.
Thank you so much, Kareem. Honestly, you drove home the point that we need to have more of a holistic view and a holistic management perspective on how we help persons who are living with obesity or who are considered to be overweight. Because even as we're kind of just going back to the mental health perspective, so I tend to do that because of the profession, but it did seem like you feeling as though you had to lose the weight kind of consumed you so much that it really took you tried so many different things. And as you said, you were counting calories, and you're doing also sometimes you were eating less calories than you probably should have. And that could have also gone back to maybe the lack of resources you had at the time, the pressure to feel like you need to lose the weight, and, all of this kind of, really consumed you to the degree that you just wanted to feel better at that point, and feel better and look better. And that is why we really need to try our best, in the Caribbean, to try to manage the way that we try to focus on how people are viewed, people who have obesity, people who are considered overweight. We need to look at the language that is being used, as well as the options that are in schools, which also kind of leads me to remind everybody, in case some people aren't familiar with the fact that HCC, Healthy Caribbean Coalition, has been advocating strongly for healthy school environments so that it's easier for children to make a healthy choice, as opposed to when kids bring snacks to school and, the person next to you has apple slices and celery, but, looking over, you see somebody else with chips and, the sweet cookies and all of that, and you're wondering, okay, maybe I should have that instead because maybe somebody's making fun of me for having something healthy, right? We need to try and make it easier for our children, easier for our parents as well, and just have a holistic approach to this. And so I would really like to bring on Ms. Sutton now, because as the Health and Wellness Coordinator at the Ministry of Education in St. Kitts and Nevis, what policies or programs can you tell us about, or do you think should be prioritized to protect the physical and mental well-being of children who live with overweight and obesity in the school system?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon now. To start off, talking about the curriculum aspect, I'll start off with that and we go on to the other areas that we could be looking at from a policy perspective. So within St. Kitts and Nevis, it's typical around the whole of the Caribbean, we have a strong sporting culture. We do excellent sports. From an international perspective, we feel we take that sporting pride and we automatically assume sport education and PE are the same. So one of the things that we have been doing in St. Kitts and Nevis is rebranding our physical and health education, and where we have health and wellness. And the health and wellness curriculum emphasizes physical literacy and health literacy. So that's one of the things that we will suggest from a regional standpoint. Yes, we do have PE programs, but we have to now consider or analyze our PE programs sport programs or sport education development programs versus a physical literacy program. And when I mention physical literacy, it's about teaching children to be confident in their ability to do and being active for life. So that's just like a general way of saying what physical literacy is. So it's not just about going out and learning how to play football, playing basketball, play cricket and netball. It's about ensuring that they develop the skill sets. Yes, the motor skill and non-locomotor and the manipulative skills of sport. But beyond that, what do they need to be active for life? So the recreational activities, understanding what health-related fitness is. So when we're teaching children in primary school, they know the exercise in order to keep their body fit, how their cardiovascular system, their nervous system, the mental health, and so forth. So that's one area of the physical literacy, or quality physical education curriculum that emphasizes physical literacy versus sports development. And then when we look at the health literacy within our region, as was mentioned before, we have HFLE, right? Healthy family and life education. And so what in St. Kitts and Nevis, we've taken that curriculum and we also expanded it as well. So that's a health literacy curriculum, which puts the emphasis on, again, broadening it beyond just the self and interpersonal relationships. Healthy eating and fitness are branched together. We separated it so children understand what healthy habits are. The psychosocial development, so growth and development is there, but we broadened it out into even further areas. So we have 3 major sections: healthy self, which has healthy habits, healthy eating, self-esteem and self-efficacy, emphasizing that mental health, what I'm able to do and how confident I am in my ability to do. And then we look at growth and development. And then we go into a healthy community section, healthy relationships, which look like family and friendships, supporting others. So again, a child living with obesity or anyone living with any kind of ailments or so forth, how do you support someone? So it's beyond just looking at it from an NCD. Also, we look at how do you support someone socially? So those are things that we're looking within our curriculum, and expressing your feelings, right? So that's in our healthy relationship strand. And in our healthy community strand looks at safety and risk, media awareness, which is a huge aspect that we have to look at when it comes to social media, because statistics have shown that children or their youth who are engaged in social media at the level they are now, it's impacting their image of themselves. We revise our curriculum to a health literacy and health physical literacy curriculum, and that's something that is to be considered in the region health education. Now within a school program policy, in addition to the curriculum, that's teaching the subject. Again, in St. Kitts Nevis, health and wellness is now a core subject within our primary schools, and we're getting to the point we're implementing in our secondary schools. So it's just as valued as science, math, English, language arts. And now health and wellness is a core subject within our primary school education, with the fact that we do have PE and HFLE at high school, but the curriculum at that level has not implemented in full, but we still have the PE and the HFLE at secondary. But ultimately, a core subject has been established to support the need for health. Another thing that we recognize, and also when you look at the data around the world, our children are not necessarily as active as we think they are during their downtime. So the break time, the lunch time, you'll see now children going out and think break time is socializing, eating their sometimes unhealthy snack, and what happened to the games that they're playing. Because the recommended amount of physical activity a child should be receiving is 60 minutes of moderate activity a day. So when you look at the amount of time and they're not being active during their recess or their break time and their lunchtime, we're losing valuable time during the school day, right? So a program that we could be considering is ensuring that we have active breaks, a designated program, and we sit down, we figure out how does an active break look like? Because don't assume a child knows how to play a game, because those days are gone. Many of our children, you'll be amazed, don't know how to play, don't know how to do hopscotch, Mississippi, even playing a fun game of tag. How do you play modified games of football, netball, cricket? Because the break time is too short to say, I'm gonna go play a game of football. However, we might play small goal, 5v5. Do we have the infrastructure at the school? Because we have a lot of play fields, but do we necessarily have the equipment already for the children to go out and play? So we have to ensure that we look at how do we ensure, sorry, I keep saying ensure, how do we implement active breaks during lunch and break time? That's one way we can boost the physical activity that children should be getting. As mentioned before from other panelists, that importance of a healthy school meals program or policy, but also including the school meals, school healthy snacking. As you just mentioned, when you send your child to school with some carrots and some celery sticks, but everyone else in the class or a majority of the children in the class have their chips, it is gonna be a certain situation of social pressure to eat unhealthy foods, right? So also ensuring that we put in practice in our protected space, because school is supposed to be a safe space, a safe zone. Even if we have the vendors selling outside the school, what's the practice within the school? Many of the early childhood education centers, you cannot send your child to school with any processed snacks. Well, within St. Kitts and Nevis, well, it's not suggested. But the moment you go to primary school, we have junk food day, and then you have healthy snack days, right? Because you don't want to say, you want to tell a child they cannot eat any chips. That's unrealistic. But let the child understand that it's a junk food. What is a junk food? What does it do to you? And then what does the healthy food do for you? So also giving them that ability, giving that knowledge, and also establishing that social context. That's why healthy snacking policies are very important within our schools. Because when you look at the amount of snacks, calories taken in from snacks, especially with primary school children, some statistics say that it's 25%, but it could be as high as almost 50%, depending on how much that child's eating in the day. They ate a snack in the morning, they ate a snack at lunchtime, because sometimes they don't eat their school meal that's provided. They go eat the snack that mommy and daddy sent to school. They eat a snack again at afternoon break, and they go home and eat snack, and they'll snack again. How many children are actually partaking in how many quality meals versus how much of them eat
Sorry, Ms. Sutton.
Partaking in unhealthy. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Ms. Sutton, you're breaking up a little bit. I hope you can hear me.
And
Okay, great.
Here, yes. Is this better now? I turn off my
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
video. Okay. So student services within our system, we do have remedial activities or remedial programs that provide extra support for us to consider additional student support, and that will include, as we say in our special ed, or individual educational plans, so that educational plans that will be sent home, or auxiliary programs within the school, along with within the program that supports the parents and the students to understand what healthy, active lifestyle looks like. And so that is something that we could look at as the additional student support, the mental health aspect of it all. Why are they maybe overeating is something that we really have to address, because emotional eating is real. If I feel bad and I go home and eat something, does that make me feel better? And then that might now turn into why a child might be overweight. And then the healthy eating is only being dealt with from a portion size. And when people see me eating, I'm eating healthy, but then I end up becoming a closet eater because of I'm eating for emotional satisfaction. So there are a lot of areas that we have to look at, and that was where the additional student support mechanisms that will be beneficial within our school system. So
no,
that would
excellent, Ms. Sutton. Yeah, excellent. I think that all Caribbean islands, or possibly all school systems in the world, need to develop some sort of framework like what you have created, because I don't think Antigua has anything of the sort. I know some schools do, kind of their own thing and try to integrate it as best as they can, but it seems like in St. Kitts and Nevis, it is completely, you guys have figured it out. And so
we're figuring it
would
out.
be great if that could be shared with the rest of us.
Yes, it's a work in progress.
Yes.
It's not perfect. As I said, it's a curriculum that we're implementing, but ultimately, as you said, we are really trying to tackle it from an educational standpoint, that it's beyond just telling someone to do something. We have to empower them and teach them the skill sets to be healthy for life.
Exactly. Ms. Sutton, I think you might have so many questions in the question answer segment. So I think that we might possibly go to Jomo Phillips's video presentation now, so that we leave as much time as possible for the question and answer segment, if that's all right. And he would have been answering two questions. So what are two things that he thinks the current HC system is doing to help properly manage his child's obesity, and two things that the system could be doing better?
I think two things that the healthcare system has helped in terms of sort of helping my daughter to manage obesity and ourselves as parents has been, one, just the passion and concern and care of her pediatricians. And that has been clear in terms from the very beginning, when they were sort of concerned about her weight, and us and her community, and those pediatricians communicating that to us as parents, but also them sort of working with us in terms of helping her to manage her weight, and also making us aware of some of the resources that are available in the community. I think one of the things in terms of sort of addressing the healthcare system, though, is that awareness and that sensitivity, maybe just children who are struggling with weight and their parents, that sensitivity needs to be something that has increased generally in the healthcare system. I think sometimes we may be insensitive just to some of the challenges that parents and children face. The other thing as well too is also making sure that there are much more resources available for young people who may be struggling with weight. I know that the Heart and Stroke Foundation's gym has been a real resource to us, but there also needs to be opportunities for many more parents with similar programs, and just also being able to have opportunities for parent education and parent support as well.
Okay, excellent. So just to briefly drive home some of the main points here today, I think that we've really looked at the fact that we need to have a holistic perspective here. We need to involve the parents, we need to involve the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, look to the schools. We need to move away from focusing on the fact that this is the child's problem, and the focus should be on this is a community problem, this is a country problem, worldwide problem, that we all need to try our best to work together to assist everyone so that we can have a healthier world, and as we're focusing here, a healthy Caribbean. Okay, now we're just gonna have a little Q&A here. So if anybody has any questions, if you could type your questions here in the Q&A box, that would be great. And there are a few people who have typed already, so we'll just get it started. There was a comment from someone that parents should understand that no is not hurting the child when it comes to unhealthy eating. And I agree. I think that you can't always agree to give the child what they want, because you do have to set boundaries for your children at the end of the day. Juanita James asked, and I think this was possibly to Prof. Samuels, this might have been a question for you. How do you respond to the belief that the child will outgrow obesity? And Prof. Samuels, if you don't specifically want to answer, but another panelist would like to, that's fine, but I think it was addressed to you.
I will make a couple of comments, but I would like Dr. St. John to also respond.
Okay.
I think this is a little bit of a myth. Because the statistics show that obese children become obese teenagers and they become obese adults. There are a few children who will, they stretch up so that if they grow very rapidly over a short period of time, which some boys do, I mean, they can put 3-4 inches on in a year. It will seem as if they are sort of stretching upwards and not outwards. But for the majority of children, this growing out of it thing doesn't happen, because it's the food pattern that's driving the obesity. And if the food pattern remains the same, the obesity will remain the same.
Thank you. And we have Prof. St. John on, and Juanita did confirm that it was a question to you. So I will repeat the question just so that you can hear it again. But they're asking, how do you respond to the belief that the child will outgrow obesity?
I respond to say, just as Professor Samuel said, the likelihood is extremely low. I mean, it really is not realistic, because this hasn't started yesterday, as explained to parents. It starts way before, and when it's identified, it's escalating to be obvious to most. So it is not easy, but it's never too late. And certainly the nutritional aspects of physical activity, portion size, and lots of other factors can be reined in to see that you can prevent the rate of obesity increasing. And certainly with some weight loss in children, we try to have them grow into the weight instead of losing weight. Progress can be made, but regular monitoring is important. People tend to give up easily and drop out, and close follow-up is very important.
Thank you, Prof. St. John. Our next question is from Regina Thomas, and this is for Ms. Sutton. Ms. Sutton, can you join us once again? So your question is, what do you think should be done to encourage children to be more active during their downtime as it relates to the regional scale?
Well, as I mentioned before, the curriculum plays a huge role in the case of homework. So when we send our children to school, they bring homework for math, English, and so forth. One of the things that we can ensure from a regional standpoint, our curriculum includes home involvement. As you said, I'm seeing in the chat, parental involvement. So children coming home, you're engaging with your parents. Also, their homework may include showing the parents what they're doing to improve their fitness. What are their fitness goals? What are their fitness aspirations? Developing home fitness plans, similar to in social studies, you'll go home and make a home emergency exit plan. So that is something, ways that we could look from a regional standpoint and from their downtime, because their downtime includes at home. But then at the school time, as I said, active breaks, bringing back those old school games, as we will say, and teaching them those games and how to be active for life in their downtime.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sutton. Regina Thomas had another question, and she has just confirmed that this could be for any panelist. She did address it to you, Ms. Sutton, at first. So
yes, I'm aware of the National Nutrition Policy. There was efforts, I believe that's a regional effort as well, that each country, each territory should be working on it. St. Kitts Nevis, we are working on our National Nutrition Policy. So the aspect of the question I see, promoting healthy eating. Yes, promoting healthy eating is necessary. That's a public health perspective. And again, we have to ensure that it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So promotion, teaching, and all those things have to be considered, and ensuring that from a school perspective, that is being taken care of from the policy, but our curriculum is going to help to solidify and make that more concrete, because it's a skill set, a knowledge that has to be applied to ensure that what is healthy eating, and going back to what I was saying, healthy snacking, right? So I agree with you that the policies are there and we need to ensure that we implement them, and also there's actually school-based policies. It's not just a national policy.
Okay, great. And I think one last question from Marva. To what extent does too much screen time affect an overweight or someone living with obesity, or a child who is considered to be overweight? How much does screen time affect them? And that could be to Ms. Sutton or anyone. And that will be our last question, because we are pressed for time today, because the discussion was just riveting.
Would someone else like to answer, or I could answer now?
I would just like to jump in with a slight comment, which is, I think that there is a lot of focus on reduced physical activity. But I also think that the majority of the problem of obesity has to do with what we eat. So I don't want us to be, quote unquote, distracted. Physical activity is very important for mental health, for, socializing and all of that. But if it's for obesity, it's not on the same level as what we eat. What we eat is more important.
And any other panelists just want to add their thoughts? If not, then I will hand it over to Danielle.
Sorry, yeah, so when it comes to the screen time, as we mentioned before, the mental health aspect, why are they engaging in so much screen time? Or in general, a lot of our children engaging in screen time. So it's about developing the healthy habits to offset or to substitute for screen time. And once again, those are discussions we have to empower children to live a healthy lifestyle, which includes, as you're saying, the snacking, as Professor Alicia just mentioned, because sometimes when it comes to the screen time, there's also unhealthy eating habits associated with it. So ultimately looking at what's a bad eating habit or a bad habit, and how does that lead to other unhealthy lifestyle development. So it's very important that we look at the holistic approach. What is a healthy habit? What are also other healthy habits children could be engaging in to support healthy and active lifestyle?
Great. Thank you so much to Elena and our panelists for taking us through that conversation. Again, it was really focused on the future of obesity management. And so I know we're quite pressed for time. So this is the last rapid fire segment of the whole webinar. So I'm inviting all of our panelists to turn their cameras on and join me. And it really is us creating a wish list of where we go from here. So you've heard, and I've heard in the audience as well, this need for our ongoing investment in prevention, and us turning towards also thinking of that 1 in 3, thinking of how we really also need to invest in caring for those children who do live with overweight and obesity. And so I'm going to ask my panelists rapid fire, one wish that you have with regards to prevention and management of childhood obesity moving forward. And so Prof. Samuel, starting with you.
Okay, so I know my wish is not going to come true, but my wish is that we should ban the marketing of unhealthy products to children, because every $100 they spend, it creates $200 extra in consumption, which would not have happened but for the marketing. They need to stop promoting toxic environments to our children.
Thank you, Prof. I would like to comment on that, but rapid fire. Turning to Elena. Elena, your wish.
My wish would be for the stigma associated with persons who are considered to be overweight and considered to be living with obesity to be removed, and for us to focus more on helping and assisting as opposed to labeling.
Thank you, Elena. And Prof. St. John.
My wish, in addition to supporting Prof. Samuels, is to have throughout the Caribbean formulation and implementation of a uniform schools nutrition policies to encompass students from the age of 4 up to the age of 17 when they leave the school, because that is the environment they spend most of their time apart from vacations. And this is where we can cut down on the excessive portions, the food which is very processed, the sugar sweetened beverage. Those 3 things are very important. A school nutrition policy for all schools throughout the Caribbean.
Amen. Thank you, Prof. St. John. And to Ms. Sutton.
My wish should be for the parents to understand that they're there to support our children in developing healthy habits. So stop sending the salty, sugary snacks to school and start cutting up some carrot sticks and celery sticks and apples and fresh mango and guava and so forth that we can send to our schools for healthy snacking and healthy eating habits. So the parents' wish, that's what my wish is.
Thank you, Ms. Sutton. And I'm going to also include Pierre's wish, which was that the rights of children are respected and protected in all of our obesity prevention and management efforts. Very on brand for Pierre. And my wish is to echo all of your wishes, but really thinking through again and kind of aligning with Elena's point on the need to have our children be treated with care. And if, when necessary, institutionalizing weight stigma and bias protocols within their spaces so that their mental health well-being is protected. Because I think our children deserve so much better. In fact, I think we can all agree that they deserve the best. And so closing off, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Ms. Maisha Hutton, to share her wish and end with closing remarks.
Thank you, Danielle. What a wonderful panel today. And I was so pleased to see that we've started shifting the conversation to address the 1 in 3. You know, globally, we have over 390 million children living with overweight and obesity, and 1 in 3 in the Caribbean is a significant number. So very pleased to see that we're moving into this area and really focusing on how we manage. So my wish is really, you know, at the highest levels of CARICOM is the political prioritization of addressing childhood obesity, and not just kind of language around it, but actual action to implement a package of policies. And we know that a package of policies is what is needed rather than one single silver bullet. We know that we need a comprehensive, holistic suite of policies recommended by PAHO, WHO, CARFA, and HCC. So my wish is those policies are implemented, because we know that it works. We've seen it in other countries, and we have more to lose than many other places in the world. We are small, vulnerable populations that are contracting and aging, and we can't afford to have 30% and rising of our children kind of doomed to this future of increased NCDs early in adulthood. So with that, I would like to close and thank everyone for joining us today. It's been a wonderful webinar. Thank you for all of the panelists, the lived experiences, the clinician experiences, public health perspectives, and those of practitioners such as Ms. Sutton working in the schools, and our healthcare professionals or mental health care professionals as well. So as we close up, I wanted to just, you'll see on the screen, we have a webinar next week, which is really owned and led by the Healthy Caribbean Youth Arm in partnership with the youth arms of our partner organizations. And it's a webinar, Different Voices, One Goal, Youth Perspectives from Caribbean SIDS. And we're very excited to include Pacific Youth SIDS as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from those perspectives on childhood obesity from our young people. Please join us. Registration details are in your chat group. And thanks again to all of you who joined us today. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the weekend ahead.